everyone. Welcome
Hi.
back to Queer Relationships, Queer Joy. I'm Keely Helmick.
I'm Melisa de Seguirant.
And we are hanging out today with Tuck. We're going to let them introduce themselves because I don't want to mess up anybody's names, last names, whatever. But I do want to say we like to start the show with introducing ourselves. And then Melisa and our intro has become shorter and shorter because we're like, if you want to know the whole thing, go back to previous
Go back and listen to episode 1. You'll learn all the things.
My pronouns are they, them. I am a queer, gender fluid, non-binary femme. Sometimes relationship status is now super single. Yeah, that's it for now. Yeah.
And I'm Melisa. I use she, her pronouns. I'm bisexual, polyamorous, solo poly, all the things. Still, making profiles, deleting them. Still on that game.
Yeah. And I'm Tuck Malloy. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a non-binary and trans human. And I also am a holistic sex educator. And yeah, super queer. Love that. Always been that way. But, it has taken many iterations in my life. So right now I live with a partner in the Bay Area. But actually right now I'm in Portland and I'm staying with one of my life partners who's an important connection to me. So yeah, I'm non-monogamous, poly, that also, and a relationship anarchist. So I feel like all of those terms kind of none of them quite land for me. So I use them differently on different days. But yeah, I'm stoked to talk to y'all.
Yay. We've had some feedback from listeners that were like, oh, what are the different vocab? And so for those, I would love to hear when you say relationship anarchist, what are you just saying?
Yeah, I would love to explain that because I think it's a really powerful term and idea that has also been in all of our lives in lots of ways for years. Like in human history, people have been practicing relationship anarchy because essentially it is the destabilization of a hierarchy in which romantic and sexual relationships are prioritized above all other relationships. So yeah, that term I think can feel good to some people and not great to other people. Like terms are always like that, labels are always like that. But I find it to be helpful. I like the idea of anarchy, of chaos and embracing that in a productive and collaborative way, because I think that that's cool and feels kind of witchy to me. But it's definitely not an orientation of thinking about relationships that is chaotic necessarily. Like all relationships get to sort of emerge in the way that they want to. And I feel like that thinking about that, being okay, this relationship just has space to kind of grow into whatever it wants. If it wants to be a friendship that has just a lot of cuddles and hugs, that's great. If it wants to be a long-term, long distance, power play dynamic, it can be that. If it wants to shift between different kinds of things, it can. The relationship just sort of gets to show up as it is more organically.
I love the way you talk about making space for that to naturally evolve and happen. We've been talking a lot about getting rid of the relationship escalator and all of these steps, which comes, at least from my perspective, so much from a heterosexual, monogamous lens anyways. So, but spaciousness, that's a great concept.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that's what non-monogamy has brought to my life, is just feeling okay, there are options for me. There are no conversations that can't happen, even if they're really hard or even triggering or super painful. There's space for those feelings also, because I feel like in my life if anything, my experience of exploring relationships outside of the cis-hetero-patriarchy realm has been not just super fun all the time. There are big hard feelings in there, but they can still be coupled with pleasure and love and safety, which it kind of sounds like is part of what y'all are vibing in this podcast, is being let's bring it back to where we find joy and connection and just good, yummy, sexy queer feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And like how you're saying, and even just like expanding, it's not, there are a lot of interviews with romantic couples, but it's not, the focus is not just romantic. It's like expanding, like you were saying, of like our relationships, our connections with in all different kinds of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I was mentioning before, people have been living like that for a really long time. Having a relationship, I mean, so I think a good example of this is if you think about, in any society before it was colonized, there's often just a lot of different kinds of relationships that really matter to people. And sometimes there's like an emphasis on okay, these ones are really important, or like we really need these ones. But I think this experience of being straight couple, married, the nuclear family is very much like a white patriarchy culture thing that has been brought into all of our lives without our consent. um,
And we're made to feel bad, or like sometimes we can be made to feel bad, or like the idea of like so many, it's like compulsory heterosexuality, compulsory monogamy, like this idea of this is what you're supposed to do. And then we have this internalized shame or this internalized negativity if we're not living life in that way.
Even the way they talk about like, being polyamorous, I've had people refer, oh, it's an alternative lifestyle. And like, alternative to what? Like this is just a lifestyle.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like always being put in that alternate space of being, almost like the shadow space of being either you're in the light and you can show up and be present and be public, or you can be like this alternative thing that we don't want to talk about as much. It's just like weird and kooky, and we literally sometimes cannot share with people in our life, which can really suck.
Well, speaking of public, so you've been doing some things on Instagram and you have some classes, and do you want to tell our listeners more about what you're doing or just how you show up in the world?
Yeah, I have a lot of different projects happening right now because recently I was like, okay, I really want to do this sex education work full time. And like many people who are navigating capitalism, which is all of us, like I've been doing, side jobs or day jobs, and then basically working double time, also teaching classes and creating content on Instagram. So a couple months ago, I was like, okay, I really want to give myself a chance to show up fully in this work and trust that my community is gonna catch me in that and hold me in that, which has been extremely terrifying, but also really beautiful. And I really do feel like my community has been showing up for me in a really big way. And all of the people from like, my very inner circle to radiating out to all of these other people who I've been able to talk to in my DMs on Instagram who have just a quick question. And I'm like, I feel very available right now to offering just knowledge and support and resources to people for free. But I also am very available to helping people more long term and affirming the need to be paid for that, which is scary as well. So yeah, I do a lot of work with people one-on-one, basically doing like a curated sex education curriculum. The thing that made me really want to go in that direction is that when I was in school, my most powerful learning experiences were when I would go to a teacher's office hours, or when I had a chance to talk to them after class and I could be like, hey, I didn't know how to ask this question in class because it felt too complicated, or like I have these other questions related to this topic, and they'd be like, okay, yes, let's break it down. So I want to give people that experience of being able to have the safety container of a one-on-one interaction, but still like we're learning together, and we can explore whatever people want, which is really fun for me. A lot of the time people will show up to a class and be like, okay, so we're doing this class, and then halfway through they're like, oh my gosh, I'm realizing that I have all of these questions about this other thing. And I'm like, okay, great. Do you want to just talk about that right now? I have that knowledge. I can give that to you right now, or we can do another class in the future. It's really collaborative, which feels really good. And similarly feels like a destabilizing a lot of the structure of traditional teaching styles. So that is awesome. And then I also teach group classes too. I'm teaching a fisting workshop this week with Gabrielle Cassell, which I'm really excited about.
I love that.
Yeah. And that's just like, we were both on Instagram posting about fisting. And then we had the little exchange in our DMs being like, oh, love that you're talking about that. Love that you're talking about that. And then we were like, wait, we could talk about it together. And I think that's been really special too, to see that this non-competitive energy
Yeah.
among people, which again reminds me very much of my experience in relationships of like navigating that with metamors or like
Mhm.
friends of friends or like wherever jealousy comes up. And so it's been really cool to feel in myself this desire that other people really succeed. And also be like, oh, I want to get to know them more. I want to work with them. I want to be with them because, yeah, that is not something that is encouraged
No,
at
not
all.
at all. No, not we're, part of a small group practice. And when I'm talking to other group practice owners, it always has this like this edge, this like this squeaky, like, oh, it feels a little awkward. And I'll be like, oh, let's do this. And yeah, I found recently I've been reaching out because I just want to say I'm so excited about the fisting because it has such a negative connotation and it's so fucking rad. And I'm so glad that y'all are talking about it. But yeah, the competitive piece is like reaching out and wanting to work with people and they're like, oh yeah, well, here's my price list. And I was like, oh, I'm glad you charge for your service. I was actually just wanting to collaborate or like talk, but like, if you want me to pay for your time, we can talk about what that means. But like, no, I just want to like collaborate.
Yeah.
What other people are doing and how can we cross post and promote each other's stuff. And for us at the collective, like we can talk about you to be, oh, here's sex education. We can do sex ed in our sessions, but the sessions are better off if we collaborate and have sex coaches working with us and sex educators. And then there's all these other realms that people can explore.
One thing we've talked about too, even as like therapists, like we don't have the monopoly on mental health or sexual health or pleasure. Like I would want my clients to be seeking, community and support and information everywhere they can get it. And so that's part of my agenda too, even with this podcast of like building community, having more of us working together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel the same way in the other direction where like I'll often ask my students like, what does your support system look like? Because if we reach an edge, like if something comes up where you're feeling triggered or activated, let's make a safety plan for you. That's within my wheelhouse of being, okay, cool. Who do you know? Who can you go to? Including your therapist, or me being, great, let me help you find a therapist. Like, let me do that research for you to come up with a list of queer therapists who are going to get what is going on with you. So, I mean, it's all the same as navigating that stuff in relationships of being like, okay, yeah, my partner needs this thing. I'm reaching this edge. If I can't give this to them, I don't have space for this today. And being like, cool, yeah. Do you want to reach out to your friend or your other partner? Like, let's make a plan for you. Or like, just like a collaborative community experience feels very cool, very sexy.
Yeah. And so much more queer joy and pleasure, like accessibility.
Yeah.
But that collaboration, I think when the way you were saying that, because I think about like folks who are monogamous, especially listeners who are monogamous, and using that framework to still be like, yeah, you can be monogamous sexually, you can have a monogamous sexual and romantic partner, but you still have all these other humans and these capabilities of connecting and building relationship and building intimacy. I hate so much how intimacy is the code for sex. Like, no.
Like, who are you intimate with?
Yes.
It's such a classic question. And it's like, I'm intimate with a lot of people. I don't have sex with that many people right now. Because again, like the pandemic too, I feel like has changed everything for me in terms of the way that I'm relating to people. It's just not, I don't have the capacity, literally the social capacity to go on dates in the way that I used to. And it doesn't feel safe or accessible to the people in my bubble or my circle. And so that's really required me to reckon with these things of being like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm having sex with one person, but my relationships are still oriented towards destabilizing any kind of like script that is making me feel like I have to be one kind of way. And I feel like that's why a lot of the time, yeah, with my students who are interested in exploring non-monogamy or interested in exploring monogamy, like wherever they are, I'm like, let's explore all of the relationship frameworks, styles. Like, let's just learn about everything that people have given names to, and then from there, piece it together and make something that's working for you and your partners in your life.
What would you tell yourself if you could go back to yourself 5 or 10 years ago before? What would you tell yourself back then, now that you have learned with your relationship dynamics and who you are as a human and how you relate to people differently?
Yeah, it's such a good question too, because I'm trying to think of like my timeline, but 5 years ago, like I was not like out as non-binary. I was having my first more intentional queer relationships. I had been in a relationship that was like really loving and supportive to me, and like I felt very seen in my queerness, but just wasn't having as many queer relationships as I wanted to, as many sexual experiences as I wanted to. So it was like right at that cusp, and I think I would have just been like, hey, this is really exciting. I think I would have just been like, hey, I'm really excited for you. I'm like getting a little emotional because I'm like, I think at that point, I had no idea how much joy and pleasure was going to come into my life. And everything felt so scary. And I felt like all of these steps that I was taking to be more intentional about connecting with queer people in whatever realm, like as friends. I didn't have that many queer friends. I didn't feel like I had a queer community. And so that was like right at this point where I was like, I need to find this. And it felt scary and but exciting. But I just had no idea how good it was going to be. I guess like it was like I had no idea how much my mind was going to be consistently blown by how delicious queer people are as friends, like as lovers, as relationships, how much more pleasure I was going to feel in my physical body, especially in exploring gender identity and then relating to people in that way. There were so many things that I didn't realize, like, oh yeah, just feeling off all day long. Like that's just not something that I feel anymore in the same way. Like I'll have emotional ups and downs, but it was just like now I'm like, okay, yeah, I feel like I can show up to something like this podcast or whatever and be like, yeah, I'm good with showing up with the way that I look, with the way that I feel internally, and I'm not trying to hide my exterior. And that is very pleasurable. Like that feels really good.
Well, and you like show yourself on Instagram.
Oh yeah. Totally.
It's so great. It's so great. Just like the gender bending, the just fucking free sexual
and your presence, like so
and your
embodied.
presence.
And so yeah, it's remarkable.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel really grateful too. My partner is a really talented photographer and filmmaker. So the collaboration that we do together is super special because I feel like I can fully show up and be like really like previously at different points in my life, I didn't feel like I could like be in front of a camera super easily, but like we've built that relationship, that safety So then it's like, we're just playing, and it feels really good to share that with the world. Sometimes I have like moments where I'm like, this is like a lot, like I'm really sharing like a lot. Like this is my whole body. Like this is like a window into my literal sex life. And then other times I'm like, you know what, like that's fine. The reason why this is so edgy is because we never get that. And so often the representations of sex that we get are not coming from an embodied place.
Yeah.
So I think it feels more intimate because you can tell that I'm like there.
You can go on the internet and see all kinds of bodies and sex and sexual displays, but not like you have that very specific, and I don't always know how to describe it to cis-het folks, but it's like you're so fucking queer, and it's like the way that you just show. So like as a queer person, I'm like, oh my God, that's so amazing. Oh my God, I love it. Like I was kind of embarrassed to do this interview actually, because I'm like, they are so hot and I'm gonna like so nervous talking. And I'm turning red right now, but I felt like it was appropriate to say it this time. But like, yeah, because it's such something you just don't see very much at all. And we were even saying earlier, like even like porn, like, two women, you know, it's like cis white.
I can't watch straight girls in porn pretending not to be straight. Like it's a turnoff. You can feel energetically that like there's nothing that's not for me. You know, there's nothing connecting there with anything actually queer.
Yeah, that's so real. Watching queer porn like with queer people, like Crash Pad series was the first one that I really watched, that I was like, I felt like the first couple of times that I watched videos or content from Crash Pad, it was like I couldn't even like really engage with like actually like masturbating, because I just was like having such an intense like full body experience of being like I felt like I was so stimulated that I had to bring it down many notches like before I was like, okay, yeah, now I can like engage with this in a sexy way. But it felt way more intense to watch. But I think again, that's like something that I really love, is exploring those different kinds of connections, that different kind of energy, because when you have strong boundaries and strong consent practices, then like we can share that like appreciation for each other, being like, you're super hot, we're loving this, like everyone's sexy. You can share that without it feeling scary or fearful or activating, if there is a container in which people feel like they can say, okay, that's actually not how I want to be talked to, or this is the way I want to be experienced, or you know, this is our relationship outside of this moment where we're just like, yay, you look so hot in those pictures. When I was in college, I had a group of friends who used to share, we just had a feed of like our nudes. We would just share our nudes with each other, and it was just like an appreciation.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been trying to find more people like that in my life. And I'm like, yes, I would love to show up and witness your sexiness in a way that feels good to you.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's well, and to have that modeling, like I think about, we think about like youth a lot, and like having this modeling, this role modeling, because I know, and I'll age everyone knows, I'm 41. So my experience, when I look at my high school experience and even in my 20s, it's so different. And I know I sound old saying it, like it's so different. And like now at 41, I feel such an expansion of like, I don't give a fuck what anybody says. I'm gonna be on the dance floor. I'm gonna be like showing up with all my things. Like I'm gonna be talking about all the things. And it's great. And that's why we're here talking about this, is that people have modeling of just something that's real and authentic and embodied and raw, and this way that everyone can be and can incorporate all these pieces. Even the cis-hetero-monogamy people, they can learn from this too.
Yeah. They are also welcome. Yeah.
Have you heard of the book Tragedy of Heterosexuality?
No, tell me
it
about
right
it.
now. Mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah. What is it about? Like, tell me.
Well, it's basically like, hey, there's all these like statistics, y'all aren't doing so well. Like, how can we help you? And so it's like a cis white gay woman who like is academic, and she does all this research and is like, basically, which it says something about, like, I really, after reading that book, was like, oh my gosh, basically she outlines how our history of counseling and psychology and like self-help trying to force people to be together that don't want to be together. Like, that's like the premise. Like, oh, here, let's figure out and help cis men how to be nice to, and how do women try to get men to be attracted, and how do we get them to want to have sex?
And the piece that's really standing out to me too is this departure from pleasure.
Yes,
completely, especially for like, you know, women in that arrangement, that it's not really about what feels good to you, like nothing about that, you know, it's how to be desirable, how to be, it's how to follow that escalator.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's been a really powerful experience to have students who were in a very different place when we started working together than where they are at the end. I have noticed that a lot of, especially like queer trans educators who are like very understandably exhausted of dealing with people's bullshit, who are like, I don't want to work with cis men, you know? And I'm like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Like, big vibe. And then other times I'm like, I actually like feel really available to folks who are monogamous and are in a gender binary right now, in that mindset, because I've met so many people who have, like, as soon as they felt like it was a possibility for them to break out of it, they were like, okay, yeah, I'm interested in none of that now.
Well, and so much permission, like even some of my, you know, straight monogamous couples just saying like, look, there's not a blueprint. I've had feedback like how much relief that brought. And I feel like that's a way that I can, like, as a polyqueer person, do feel somewhat privileged in that way. Because like, I feel permission to be playful and expansive and like, whatever, you know, I'm not trapped by that system anymore, and giving other folks who may still stay in those sort of identities, but permission to spaciousness again, be playful.
I mean, I think there's a lot of space. I don't necessarily want to do that work, but I definitely am encouraging, you know, there are men stepping up that are like wanting to have more openness and be able to like talk more about emotions and sexually explore more. And and I'm like, that's awesome. And we can help them. And that's not always the best client for me.
Yeah,
and we gotta do our own self-care too, and be real about what's
that's so important. Like, that's such a pleasurable experience too, to be like, I know what my limitations are, I know what my boundaries are, I'm gonna affirm that and be like, this is how I'm available, so I'm gonna show up, because you are out here being like, yes, like, people, you should do that work, other people should do that work. And that's part of the collaboration piece too, is working in our community to be like, I'm not going to do it, but somebody should. And when I see that they're doing it, I'm going to support them.
Great. So, okay, listeners, if there's anybody out there who wants to work with these dudes and really passionately help them, DM us, let us know, email us.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm down for it. I feel like I'm down for any student who comes my way, because I like really try to create a container where I'm like, this is what's going to happen here. This is how we will be interacting with each other. And as a sex educator too, I feel like I have the freedom to be like, okay, actually, you're making me feel uncomfortable. And so we're going to close this relationship for now. We're going to close our work together. And I think that is a great, powerful skill too, that is not often talked about. And we are so often not given space and affirmations to say no to people and have that be a pleasurable experience, to be like, oh, that felt really good that I said no, felt really good that I don't have to do that anymore.
I love how much you talk about pleasure. I mean, I guess because you're a sex educator, but it's just like pleasure. It's like, yes, let's be in our bodies and just be about pleasure.
And consent.
That's our barometer.
I love the pleasure. That's going to stick with me for a while. Like saying no, being pleasurable. Thank you for that. That's huge. That's really huge because there's so much fear for so many folks about saying no or setting a boundary, or guilt that we have boundaries, which is so sad to me. You know, of course we have our limitations and our boundaries, and making that pleasurable and celebrating that, I think, is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely all about pleasure. And it's almost a joke among my friends how much I'm like, what if we felt a little bit more pleasure today? Or like, how could we feel a little bit more pleasure? What would be like pleasurable to do? So I feel available to be a little bit roasted for that, because sometimes I feel like I'm like, yeah, it's just a broken record with being like, what is, are we experiencing pleasure? Are we in our bodies right now? Like where are we experiencing pleasure while we watch this movie?
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, speaking of pleasure, we like to wrap up the podcast with each episode talking about our queer joy of the week.
Oh, I love it.
Melisa, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
I think I figured out mine, but do you want to go first?
Yeah, I will. I had two this week. It was such a joyful, pleasurable week. No, the one I wanted to share spins off of something we've talked about before, this whole like autonomy and connection and how to navigate those. And I had made the claim that I do take myself out on dates, and I did, and it was so great. It was so great. I went and was in a nice outdoor place where I could do a lot of people watching on Sunday, and I just really love people watching, and to be able to give myself permission to not feel uncomfortable or to need to look busy, but just to be like, yeah, I'm chilling here. This is my day. Like, how are you all doing? It was so great. I had the best time.
Oh, I love it.
I'm so glad you had that experience.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, sure. So my queer, so I am doing the whole exploring lots of different lots of different connection. I had a recent breakup that's really, really, really hard and emotional. And so my queer joy was that I went out, and actually I went out to a bar that I often go to. I know the owners, it's pretty queer for years. And I walk in and I'm like, whoa. I'm like, there's a lot of dudes. There's a lot of guys. And it's like a group of gay men that go bar hop together. But we're talking when you're used to being lots of different bodies, and all of a sudden it's like really tall cis dudes that take lots of space. I couldn't even get inside. So I was like, okay. So I turned around and I saw just two random people talking. And these two women, I was like, hey, what's going on in there? And we just started chatting, and I made a new friend. And it's a little queer baby who's in my neighborhood. And she we've been texting, and she got her first tattoo, and she's asking me about the dating apps. And it's just I love it so much.
That's so cute. There's something so magical too about having friends of all ages. I love that so much. Yeah. I have a really great 7-year-old friend who is, just out here exploring stuff in the world. And it's so brilliant to watch them, just kind of vibe every day, being like, yeah, today is they, them pronouns, or at one point I remember asking her, I was brought up something about being bisexual, or that word, and she was like, what does that mean? And I was like, oh, that means, if you like people who are the same gender as you or other genders. And she was like, duh. She's like, of course.
Who isn't?
Everyone like that?
Oh, I love it.
It's cool. Yeah, I feel for me this week, I have been having a very complex, lots of different emotions kind of week, but it really, the big queer joy for me is just being able to stay in the house that I'm in right now with my ex and my who's also my current love and friend, and just life partner vibes. And it's just really sweet. We were talking last night about how we've been able to hold on to we've been able to transform our romantic love into something that's even bigger and more expansive without trying to like kill off those feelings, you know? We were able to just be like, okay, now we're gonna move into this big friendship that has a lot in it, but it's just so special hugging them. I'm like, oh, well, I'm just hugging this person who I've loved in so many different ways, and I can feel all of that in the hug, and it feels very queer and very lovey.
What a great way to wrap up. Well, I just want people to be able to know how to get a hold of you and learn more about you.
Yeah, so my Instagram is at queerbrainslut. My website is intrasensual.com, or I also have a teachable website that's intrasensualeducation.teachable.com. So those are ways that you can find me. But also I feel like if people are like, those websites are confusing, like I'm very available on Instagram, very available to DMs. And oh yeah, and also my email is tuckmalloyeducation@gmail.com. I feel like everything is a different name. I need to streamline that a bit. But
It's all good.
all good. I'm around. And yeah, thank you both so much. This was such a lovely, nourishing conversation for my afternoon.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you for being here. I'm so glad to have your voice as part of our journey to share more queer joy with the community.
Yeah, it's a really important project.
Thank you, Tuck.
Yeah, thank you both.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.